Hello YouTube, Genzo Suikuden, number one fan here, the Miyazaki man. I'm delighted to be joined by the Gaming Shelf Taylor. How are we today?
I'm doing well, man. Thanks for having me on.
Excellent, excellent. So as we know, I'm going to convince you that Genzo Suikoden is the best of JRPGs from before and now that the remaster is out as well. But I know it's going to be difficult because I know some particular series you're very, very fond of. Which series are you going to talk about today?
I'm going to talk about Persona just because I feel like over the years it's just constantly won me over, and hopefully I can convince you that it can do the same for you.
Absolutely, and actually that's a great comparison because five main line titles, right? Persona 5 and Genzo Suikoden 5 being the last one as well. Very, very different games. I'm actually a fan of Persona. I'm playing Free Reload right now, but straight into it. The difference for me between a Genzo Suikoden and a Persona is the vastness of the world, right? So in Genzo Suikoden, you have a world map. You have established places on the continent. We know the Holy Kingdom of Harmonia, Greg Minister, the Torah Republic. There's a long history, right? It's almost like the times of war, the romance of the three kingdoms, different factions fighting on the same side. You get that kind of epicness of the world building. How does kind of Persona, how does it draw you into that kind of aspect?
Yeah, so Persona is not so much about exploration and the vastness of the world. If anything, it's like the opposite. Like Persona 4 is a much more intimate game. You're just hanging out in this little small town, and it's more about like the bonds that you build with the characters in the game. You like dig really deep, both story wise, but then that also comes into play gameplay wise. So I think Persona, in terms of its world and its vastness, it's much more about depth with a smaller cast as opposed to breadth with a big world and a large cast of characters.
Indeed, indeed. And one thing that really draws me in and really kind of pulls on the heartstrings as well is the concept of mortality in Genzo Suikoden, right? So it's not like unmistakable evil and different parallel worlds. It's more along the lines of these are humans living their lives during a wartime, and like deaths really make an impact, especially those that you as the player have become familiar with. They've been in your party, but when tragedy happens, when an unavoidable incident happens, and they're gone. How does kind of Persona handle that aspect of it? Because that's something that's really, it stays with you, right? Those critical moments. Oh my god, I can't believe that Aerith in Final Fantasy, for example, when she's gone.
Well, okay. Let me ask you before I don't want to get too into detail, but how deep into spoilers are we dipping our toes into? Are we trying to not be too spoilery?
Yes, let's not do spoilers. Let's do kind of a generic, high level, without names and without specific instances, just a high level,
Okay.
what to expect when you're playing the game. What kind of epic moments can you encounter?
Okay. Epic moments. Okay. Yeah. I mean, it doesn't really have to do as much with mortality. I mean, some games do touch on that, and there are, a number of important characters that die mid game in those games. But again, I feel like Persona, the epic moments come more from like self-discovery, I feel like, or trying to like understand yourself. I mean, the game's called Persona, so it's very like psychological, and it's much more about like I said, discovering yourself and these concepts of like how do you interact with the world, and how each one's kind of got a different theme to it almost. And maybe now's not the time exactly to get into that, but I appreciate that each game has a theme, and it always ties into the main story and even some bits into the gameplay. So I think it's always something to do with like your mind and the depth of being a person, I guess.
Inner growth, and how
Yeah.
they develop.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And one thing that really kind of attracts me to the Genzo Suikoden world is the continuation of the timeline, right? So as the series progressed, obviously Genzo Suikoden 1 scene setting based on a Water Margin famous Chinese novel. Number 2 is a direct kind of sequel to that, building on with more mini games, more gameplay, epic soundtrack. Number 3 is far in the future. Number 4 is far in the past. And number 5 is between number 4 and number 1, I believe. So that continuation aspect, I guess, somewhat similar to the Trails aspect. As a kind of Persona fan, do you miss that kind of interlinked between the series, or do you appreciate that they're kind of standalone games?
Well, it's funny that you say that because they are like kind of interconnected in a way. Not quite like Suikoden, but So there's characters that will make cameos in the next game, which I always find kind of fun. Obviously, they're not playable characters, and you don't like sit and interact with them in deep ways, but they do have little teases and little Easter eggs for people that know what to look for. But I kind of like that it's not that, because again, I think with Persona, the whole point is getting to know your roster of characters in such deep ways. If the same characters came back, I'm like, I already know you. I don't want to get to know you all over again. Unless you're older. And there are some games that tease that, where it's like, oh, we're in high school, and then it teases what they would be like years later. So it would be cool to get to know them years later and see how they've changed. But for the most part, I actually appreciate that they're different, because like I said, it's more about getting to know the characters in deep ways in each game.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. And something that really, really sets apart a JRPG for me, and this is also the discussion why a lot of times I prefer the anime than the manga, which is a bit taboo, right, in the Japan world, is because soundtracks, the music really brings about emotions and feeling, and you can relate to that environment. When you hear that soundtrack, even when you're working or anything like that, it evokes those memories and those moments, especially when you played it for the first time. So Genzo Suikoden has a kind of Celtic, Asian, Oriental, back in the day, kind of reminiscing theme, a lot of pianos, a lot of strings, a lot of wind instruments as well. And it's kind of zen, and you're kind of in the moment and back in the day, and what would you have done in that character situation in the past as well. I know Persona is more modern and upbeat, but what kind of emotions does the music in Persona bring out in you?
Oh man, it depends on what the situation is. I mean, the battle themes are always like hyped, like it's weird, because sometimes, like especially in Persona 5, the battle theme is not even appropriate as a battle theme. It's almost like a fun little jazz song, or just like I'm just bopping my head to it, Yeah. But they always have good battle themes. They always get me like excited to get into combat. But they have lots of songs that are much more like chill and really fit the vibe. Like there's a song in Persona 5 called Beneath the Mask, and it's very like very slow. It's almost like, let me sit in a cafe drinking a coffee, watching the rain fall down. Like it's kind of that vibe. And then there's like a theme in Persona 4 for like the local supermarket, which sounds dumb, but it's a Juness for anybody that's listening. They'll know what I'm talking about. And that theme is just so upbeat and happy. It kind of reminds me of being at like an amusement park, something like that, or an arcade maybe is a better comparison. But it just has such a wide range of emotions that it can make you feel, which again, because it's so much about the psyche and being growth, growing as a person. I think that's fitting, because we experience so many different emotions.
Indeed. Yep, makes sense to me. And in terms of the kind of arc style, so you have an arc with a main character, main protagonist, that you kind of get through their moments. I feel as though one of the classiest things about Genzo Suikoden is every single arc has a really fulfilling payoff. So at the end of it, the conclusion of that particular arc feels very, very satisfying, but leaves you just enough going into the next arc, what's coming next, the anticipation for what's coming next, and then knowing that the writers make the payoff really, really worthwhile. In Persona as well, do you think that consistency is there in terms of every single arc lives up to the standard beforehand, or are there peaks and troughs, ups and downs?
I mean, yeah, it totally depends. And in the story arcs in Persona are almost never about the main character. It's usually about the specific character, because usually the way Persona games work, 3 is not so much like this, but 4 and 5 is more like this, where like as you're getting to know a new character, or like right before they're gonna get added to the party, you're kind of getting to know them. Like in Persona 4, you're literally going through like dungeons based on their like state of mind. So you're like really getting to know them. You get to know these characters, like what bothers them, like in really deep ways. But then you can kind of set the arcs, because Persona has the social link system, where you get to know each character has like their own little mini story that you go through, and they grow and you get to know them, and they have their own arc. So they have like this big intro arc, but then they have this deeper one if you want to get to know them more. So I feel like the arcs are as good as you want to make them, I suppose. Like if you want to keep engaging with them, they're great. Certainly there's some stinker characters, because there's so many. They're not all good, but I think that's like one of the core pillars of Persona, and I think they're always really good.
Yep. true that. And I think one of the things that really makes Genzo Suikoden replayable is the fact that we know that this huge cast of recruitable characters, 108 stars of destiny at least, right, in each of the games, which means you can mix and match different combinations of characters, different runes on them, different equipments, different play styles. They can unite, with their backstory. The pirates can unite together, the pretty boys can unite together, that kind of thing, which allows, replayability, because you can just try different party members, and it's a fairly easy game, to be honest, anyway. So, you can't really go wrong with the party members you pick. In Persona as well, do you really feel that each character is very, very distinct? It adds a different flavor to your playthrough, adds that replayability value?
I would say probably not as much as Suikoden. Obviously, when you have 108 characters, and Persona typically has, I don't know what, like 9 maybe. They all are distinct, but because typically the main character can use any persona, like the main crux of Persona games is like, you want to hit the enemy's weakness so you can keep attacking. And so each character only has certain elements, but the main character can use any element. So I guess there is some replayability, but like certain bosses almost require certain setups. So I don't think there's quite that level, unless you want to use different personas. That's what they call the monsters you recruit, the personas for the main character. But other than that, I don't know if there's quite as much replayability, especially for Suikoden. So I would say not as much.
No, that's fair enough. That's fair enough. And in terms of mini games as well, right? Especially because it's like base building. You build your castle. When you recruit the characters, they open up new things to do in your castle, new shops, new mini games, new side quests, etc. So I feel as though away from the main story, there's like so much to do. Each different character brings a different aspect, almost like Skies of Arcadia. I've got the Fina statue over there. Like building upon your base, they add additional things that you can do within the game. Do you feel like the Persona games give you enough of those kind of side quests, those mini games, those extra added features that just make the game feel complete and fun?
Yeah, in Persona, there's always the side social link stuff to kind of build up your different stats. Like you can get side jobs, and that'll like bring up your courage or something. Like you can be like a after school daycare teacher, or you can work at the burger shop. And Persona 5 actually added like proper mini games, I feel like, whereas 3 and 4 and even the ones before that definitely didn't have them. But in that one, like I think there was like darts, you could go to the batting cages and play baseball. So they started getting into that much more in 5, whereas the other ones don't quite have that. But there's certainly plenty of ways to get distracted in Persona if you want to get distracted. So it's probably not quite as interactive as Suikoden, but there's definitely a good variety of different activities outside of just the core story and combat.
Yep. Fair place. And in terms of kind of memorable villains as well, so the classic trope against an almighty evil or demon from another world we got to conquer because good versus evil. In Genzo Suikoden, it's more like people on the opposite side of the wars. There's, they've got their own prerogative to defend their country, to defend their loved ones, etc. as well. And what is really memorable is if you say particular things like, the undead villain who has really created a lot of torture and pain and bad memories for particular characters in your party, or that evil sister, the witch from the past who, she must be stopped, etc. Exactly who people are talking about. It evokes all the scenes, all the dialogues, all the memories, because they've put so much thought into the development of those villains. It's not just the evil for evil's sake. Things happen to them in the past to make them act a certain way, which is why they're memorable and they're unique and distinct. It's not just a big bad evil. Does Persona do that in terms of the villains? Build them up so you can kind of understand their motives, why they do what they do?
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, that's almost the point. Like in Persona 5, for example, you're going essentially into the mind of the villains. Like you go into, like, they call them palaces, but you're going into the mind of these villains, and you're trying to figure out like how does their mind see themselves? So like they are like exaggerated versions of themselves in real life when you're like going through their dungeon. And you get to see them, and like slowly as the story progresses, as you're going through the dungeon, like you get to see them, and like some of the villains are so messed up. Like they do some crazy stuff, especially in 5. I feel like the villains are like insane. Whereas weirdly enough, like in Persona 4, like the characters are the villains, kind of, because you're trying to like fight against yourself. You're like, no, like my true self is not that bad. So you're almost fighting against yourself, which is an interesting concept. And 3 is like it's just generic monsters. There's not really they do have villains, but they don't really show up until like much later in the game. But in 3 and in 4 and 5, they're pretty strong. I feel like I think 5 is where they really got nasty with some of them.
Cool. Yep. And as you can see with the success of the Genzo Suikoden HD remasters selling amazingly well in Japan, for the world merch is coming out, the games hold the test of time, the community and the fan base is there. I don't particularly know much about Persona 1 and 2. I'm assuming you've played them already. What are the selling points of those particular games, and how do they stand up today against, let's say, Persona 5?
So I don't think they age as well. So there's actually 2 Persona 2s, which is weird. There's Persona 2 Innocent Sin and Persona 2. Oh gosh, now I'm gonna be a fake Persona fan. Innocent Sin and Eternal Punishment is the other one, because back in the day we only got one of them because they both originally came out in PS1, but we only got Innocent Sin, I think, or no, Eternal Punishment in America, but then they did a PSP release of Innocent Sin later. But they don't hold up as well because they're not this, like when Persona 3 came out, they totally changed what the games were. Back then they were just like dungeon crawlers, but with the same mentality of like, you know, the psyche of the person, and you're still summoning monsters and stuff like that. But it's more of like a straight like first person dungeon crawler. Although in Persona, one of the Persona 2s, Hitler is a villain, like literally Hitler. So it's pretty infamous that way, and people still remember it for that. But I think unless you like hardcore dungeon crawlers, like they just don't hold up as well. And even like 3 to a certain extent, like it always had weird problems. Like, okay, in the original Persona 3, you couldn't control your party members. And then when they put it on PSP, they had to really downgrade the graphics. But finally with the remake, they fixed it. And now it's really, really good. So I think actually Persona doesn't hold up. Like the further you go back, the worse it gets, for sure, in my opinion. Because people have been clamoring like, oh, remake 1 and 2. And it's like, you don't want that because it doesn't have the social link stuff. That's what people like about Persona, so they don't have that in 1 and 2. So yeah, I don't think they hold up as well. Yep.
So the old fan base and new fan base don't kind of intertwine. They're kind of separate games, just with the same title.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Yeah. Makes sense. Now, one of the things about Genzo Suikoden, if you were to describe the RPG series, I would say world, kind of interactive world that's interlinked. You've got recruitable characters, you've got base building as well, and human against human. So if I think of similar games to the Genzo Suikoden series for anyone who hasn't played it yet, I'm thinking of a niche one, maybe Radiata Stories, which is one about base building. I'm thinking Skies of Arcadia, you build your kind of pirate base as well. Maybe even Vandal Hearts or Final Fantasy Tactics, you find allies along the way to join your cause, right? For your kind of righteous cause. What games would be similar? What kind of genre series would be similar to the Persona series for anyone who hasn't played it? Can you think of any that have the same kind of tropes?
Ooh, that's a good one. The one that I always point people to is there's only one game, although they just announced a sequel not too long ago, is Tokyo Xanadu, which is literally like they're copying it to like a hilarious degree. Like your high school students, you go into an alternate dimension, just like Persona. There's sort of life sim aspects where you can hang out with your friends, and it's in modern day Japan. So it is straight up like the same thing, but there's action combat instead of turn-based combat. There's a game that, I mean, it's kind of Persona in a way. There was this game called Tokyo Mirage Sessions.
Oh yes.
And they were trying to combine SMT and Fire Emblem. So you're like these characters that they're like amateur pop, they're like working to become pop stars or whatever. But then there's also the dungeons you crawl through, and the combat's pretty similar to Persona. So there's this, dungeon crawling, life sim stuff. And there's one other that I'm trying to... Eternites is another one. That's kind of like more of an indie game, and much shorter, but same idea where, you're crawling through dungeons, and then when you come back, you can interact with your friends, and there's romance and stuff like that. So not so many like long-running series, but if you like that duality of like the life sim and then the dungeon crawling, like those are, I think, some good recommendations.
Yeah, absolutely. Good shouts out there. And in terms of the sixth installment of both respective series, so I know what I, as a fan, want now. Majority of the Genzo Suikoden fans, and I'm assuming you have played Suikoden, right? You have played Suikoden.
Yeah, I beat 1. I'm making my way through 2 for the first time right now, and really enjoying it on the HD collection.
Good. So most people are clamoring for the Holy Kingdom of Harmonia, right? All roads lead to the Holy Kingdom of Harmonia for many different reasons. I, on the other hand, would prefer they stay away from that, because that almost feels like the climax. You know, when you build up to something big and then it happens, it's kind of like everything else is just a side quest or a spin-off, even if their own, number 7 or 8 are their own titles. So I'd rather some various other lands. So my kind of ideas for it is to patch things up in maybe the grasslands or Kanakan or the Arms Kingdom. These are just names from continents and places within the Suikoden world. But what I'd be really, really keen to see is how some of the characters that do appear in Genzo Suikoden 1 and 2, you've played number 1, so Odessa, as we know, is a character. What's her past? She was an aristocrat before. What was her life like? How did she come to form her role in the first game? So that's my kind of direction for the first game. What about yourself for Persona 6? What would be the direction, the setting? What kind of environment would you like for Persona 6?
So there's been this long-running idea that Persona moves on from high school to college or university. I don't know what university life is like in Japan.
Okay, may I say hello, Taylor?
Hello.
Okay, we have a guest, the Star of Destiny here. No, please carry on.
So there's just been this long-running idea that fans have wanted Persona to move from high school to college, and people are like, oh, that's what makes the game special. But in one of the Persona 2s, you play as like adults. So I'm like, I feel like there's some precedent for it to be a little bit older. And I feel like it would just be interesting to, because you could still do like going to class, balancing the real life stuff. But I feel like that same team kind of touched on like more adult themes with Catherine. So it'd be kind of cool to get a splash of that with it going up to university as opposed to high school. And then there's always the fabled, like each Persona has like a color around it. Like Persona 5 was very red. Persona 4 was blue, yellow, and 3 was blue. Yeah. So everyone's guessing that Persona 6 is going to be green. And so usually it's like, okay, well, that's kind of an interesting color that evokes a lot of different things. So what is green? How does that tie into the theme of the series? So so I'd be curious to see what the color is. That would be my guess, is green. They've even hinted that it's green. But what I would actually really want, I would love it to be like they've been doing a Fire Emblem where you can choose the gender of your character.
Okay,
because it's always guys, and yes. Persona 3 let you play as a girl in the PSP version, but in the remake they didn't do that, and people got pretty upset about that. Yeah. So I know it'd be a lot of extra work, especially with the different social links and the romance and the way characters talk. Like, I understand that, but I think it'd be cool. That would make fans really happy to be able to be able to choose your gender. So yeah, I would say choose your gender. Let's level it up to university instead of just high school. And then whatever, I mean, I'm down for whatever else they want to do. Everything else they've been good at. The only thing I want to say is be careful with the flashiness of the looks, because I feel like in 5 was like and 3 remake were like the perfect amount. I feel like in Metaphor, because the same team worked on Metaphor, they got a little crazy. Like, there was so much zooming in, there was so much stuff going on the screen. I'm like, it was like overstimulating. So I'm like, let's dial it back a little bit. Like that, I think they overdid it in Metaphor.
Yeah, went absolutely balls to the walls, overkill on the flashiness.
yeah.
Good stuff. Final point then. So the main character of the series, right? I would say number 1's very, very memorable. You know, he knows his position, you know where he's from, you know what he's got to do eventually. It's his destiny. Number 2 is even more memorable, right? From his starting point and where he ends up as well. Number 3 is very interesting. They went a different direction. They went with the Trinity system. So there's kind of 3 main protagonists, but they all have different backstories as well. So it kind of makes sense how they all eventually cross over in the storyline and come under the campaign to, unite together. Number 4, he was very, very much a silent protagonist, deft of personality, but at the same time, he has a big impact on the story. And number 5, obviously he's central. His role is central to the whole kind of story of Genzo Suikoden 5 as well. For Persona as well, how much do the main characters stick with you? How much backstory? Are they in the right place at the right time? Is it destined that they be there? I know about Persona 3 to some extent, but how much does the main character's backstory and their whole cycle throughout the game, how much does it impact and stay with you? How much were they fleshed out?
It's really weird. I feel like they don't really get fleshed out at all in the games, but in the anime, because they don't talk, they're all like silent protagonists. But in the anime, they always flesh them out. They actually give them names, they give them personalities. So I think that's where the character actually comes out. Especially Persona 4, Yuna Rakami. Oh my gosh, he's hilarious in the anime. But in the game, you're like making their personality. They don't really have one. So if we're just sticking to the games, I feel like unless you watch the anime, they don't really have a personality. They're not that memorable outside of their design.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. You brought back some great memories, Taylor. Like, I watched the Persona 4 anime. I haven't actually played the game yet. The one scene that stands out to me is it that shower scene or something where they stand your ground.
Oh yeah, when they're in the hot spring. Yeah. My favorite from the anime is when they're in the nightclub and they're like drinking fake alcoholic drinks. They think they're getting drunk, but they're not. And they're playing like the King's game or whatever, and they're doing all these dares. Oh my god, it's so funny.
It's so good. It's so good, and the music and the animation, the smoothness, the voice acting, everything brings it to life, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. No, much appreciated. I think that's been a great recap of the differences between the Suikoden series and the Persona series. And now that I'm hearing that you're playing it through number 2, you're going to have a great experience. From your memories and experience of playing the game so far, where would the Suikoden series rank in your kind of top 5, top 10 as of now from what you've experienced?
Oh, I don't know if it would crack the top 10. I'd have to finish it for sure, just because like maybe it would peak up like in the teens or something like that. I'm really digging the story. Like I'm just getting to the point where there's a lot of twists and turns. I'm sure you know which twists. A certain character, let's say, betrays you or does something very surprising. I'm like, oh, interesting. Didn't see that coming.
Yep.
So yeah, it's definitely interesting. I haven't got to the base building part quite yet.
Okay.
I'm surprised how far in and I am, and I haven't got to the base building stuff, but I'm sure it's coming. But I gotta say, people have been knocking the remaster because they're changing the visuals and they're adding all these digital effects. I think it looks awesome. And the fact that this is so silly, but they added diagonal movement. But I love that. Yeah, I'm really digging it. I think they did an amazing job with the remaster. So I'm looking forward to finishing it.
Yeah, no, it really revives the IP, the series as well. The fan base has always been there. We've been waiting years and years, and that diagonal movement actually will help you recruit a character. Was it 1 or 2? I think it was in number 1, catching the cat for a particular character in Kaku. So instead of trapping it, you can just diagonal and get that cat to recruit that character as well. No, thank you, Taylor, so much for joining me on this session. If you haven't already, make sure to watch the Gaming Shelf, subscribe. I'm sure you're subscribed already. A huge channel, super good editing and quality as well. Make sure to like this video. Any final words for anyone who wants to get into the Persona or Genzo Suikoden series?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you've never played Persona, I think the first question is always like, okay, where do I start? Honestly, I would start with 3 Remake. I think it's like the simplest the newer Persona games ever get, but still has a lot of modern quality of life stuff. They're gonna eventually remake 4. I think they're already in the middle of doing it, so just wait. I wouldn't play 4 until the remake comes out because it's pretty old. But yeah, start with 3, play 5, and then wait for the 4 remake. I think that's a kind of a good little order to play them in right now.
Perfect. Much appreciated. You heard the man. Make sure you get into the Persona series. I'm sure you have already. Top quality games. Until next time, Miyazaki man and the Gaming Shelf Taylor, Ichiban. It means the best. Janet means ciao.